Good morning and welcome to Unabashedly Resolute Institute on Unabashedly Resolute Radio. I am your host, Wes Mullins. This is Daily Musings on the drive-in. And today I am discussing just this notion that... Sorry, I am in the middle of traffic here trying to get over to the next lane. So, just this notion that critical race theory, which says that you have to see the world, let me try to steelman this thing. It is necessarily true that humans see the world through the lens of their race, that their behaviors, thoughts, and patterns are dictated to them a priori and deterministically because of the race that they are, that culture also both influences and reinforces said behaviors based on race as well. That's the indication. Here's the thing. That is, by definition, the understanding of will to power philosophies. That there are two kinds of people: the oppressed and the oppressor, and those labels are based upon which race that you are. Are you the dominant race or are you the minority race? And this is in any country. Are you the minority race or are you the dominant race? So we are stuck in an epic battle to overthrow one another. So what happens is the minorities will band together to overthrow the majority and become the oppressor. Because see here, the only way to overthrow an oppressor is to become the oppressor, is to become greater than the oppressor. See, there is no... Inside of will to power philosophies, they're all dominance hierarchies. They're all based upon power and power structures. And so if you are at the head of a power structure, then therefore you are the oppressor if you're the head of the power structure. So as soon as the oppressed becomes the head and usurps authority from that power structure and becomes the head of the new power structure, they therefore by definition become the oppressor. And so what is the oppressed's job? The oppressed job is to overthrow the oppressor and to become the head of the dominance hierarchy. That is the job of the oppressed. That is the obligation requirement. The oppressed must overthrow the oppressor. However, that changes based on culture and based on the head and dominance within the power structures that are currently operating. So you could one day be the oppressed and next day be the oppressor based on will to power, dominance hierarchies, and critical race theories that are all will to power. So what that means is, who's right? There is no right. There is no moral. There is no moral right or wrong. There is no moral right or wrong based upon dominance hierarchies. There is simply power and power structures and heads of power structures. There is no right or wrong. There is only right or wrong in this moment. And so what is the phrase inside dominance power hierarchies? It gets to be a lot to say those things. It is in fact got some construction going on here in the road. It is in fact might makes right. So the moral obligations and the moral imperatives are, if you are the oppressed, you have to overthrow the oppressor. And if you're the oppressor, you have to be overthrown by the oppressed. That is simply might makes right. So there is no actual ought. There is no moral ought. This is the way things ought to be. So when an oppressed person says, the oppressor ought to be overthrown. That's not really actually what it is, because I guess that may be the only moral imperative. That may be the only moral ought is the oppressed. His moral obligation is to overthrow the oppressor, and the moral obligation of the oppressor is to acquiesce and be overthrown by the oppressed. It seems to be the only thing that I can work. I'm open to hearing arguments against this. This is what I've surmised and mused so far. So my thing is how I see it is there. So who is right? Which race is right? Which race is wrong? Well, there is no such thing as right or wrong inside of power dominance hierarchies. There is simply the oppressed and the oppressor. There is simply power in those seeking to attain it. There are only shifts of power. Well, there has to be something above that. So Coca-Cola says, stop being white. Critical race theory says, whiteness is a property. Whiteness is something that needs to be overthrown. Well, what is whiteness? Well, we can't define it. Well, we can define it, but when we define it, it's simply individuals being free individuals. That's honestly what it is efficacious and industrious people being efficacious and industrious people. That's what whiteness is. Okay. So there has to be a moral imperative above the class system, above the race system, above the dominance hierarchy. There has to be something above that which we can reach to and attain to and say, wait, let's get out of this game. Let's get out of this dominance hierarchy perpetuation of violence. There has to be something above that wherein both the oppressed and the oppressor can reach for that will alleviate this need of constant perpetuation of overthrowing. There has to be something above that, and there is, and that is, Viktor Frankl talks about this, the moral imperative of there's the decent and the indecent. Those are the only two things. And so you are held responsible for your behavior and actions, whether you're if it were true that there was the oppressed and the oppressor only, then there are still moral obligations inside that, wherein you are morally obligated to incur the same behavior and the same guilt for the same behavior, irrespective of where you fall in the class system of the oppressed or the oppressor. Right is still right, wrong is still wrong, irrespective and independent of where you fall on the dominance hierarchy scale. And we should all attain to achieve that. And if we achieve that, then what will happen is the barriers and the perpetuation of a dominance hierarchy will begin to melt away, because everybody is responsible for their own actions. I'm responsible for loving God and loving my neighbor. If I live if I say the moral imperative is the golden rule and the 10 commandments, then suddenly I'm going to love God and love my neighbor as myself. That's going to wreck the paradigm of me having to either acquiesce or overthrow. So that's going to change that into this notion of, I want to be the best that I can be. I want to reach my optimal peak performance. I want to reach optimization for myself, and I want you to reach optimization for yourself. So I bet we can come to put together a system wherein each of us can reach beyond ourselves and push for a political aim that is outside and transcendent of this dominance hierarchy game. And what do we get when we get that? We get the Declaration of Independence. The entire world up to the Declaration of Independence was a perpetuation of dominance hierarchies, and that's what it was. The Declaration of Independence says, no, individuals are made in the image of God, and therefore they have rights that governments can't take away. They have rights that dominance hierarchies cannot quantify and cannot utilize for the perpetuation of acquiescence or acquiescence or overthrowing. And these things are, people have a right to speak. People have a right to speak their mind, and they have a right to their opinions. No matter how acerbic they are, no matter how bad they are, people have a right to speak. And when people have confidence that they can speak without retribution, then guess what happens is we get into robust dialogue, and we actually work some things out. And it's messy, and it's offensive, and it's bad, but we actually work some things out because everything's out on the table, and nobody's afraid to say anything, because if I say this, I'll be overthrown. None of that. The Declaration actually is the political aim that sets us apart and says, hey, let's have a political aim, a moral obligation. Let's put together the things that are our rights, and let's put together the things that are our obligations. And in doing that, what we find out is that we can live in harmony as much as we can. We can live at peace with each other as much as we can. And as much as we can without the constant dominance hierarchy. Now, there are still things as competence, and there are people who are actually better at their jobs. And if you're better at your job, and you can create systems wherein you create more good for the most amount of people, and people begin to rely on your products and services, you can create inside of that some dominance, but it can be toppled very easily if someone just creates a better product to you, or creates a better system than you, and then that system becomes the quintessential dominance. And so it's called competence. It's not called power hierarchies or dominance hierarchies. It's called meritocracy, and it's called competence. And competence is not equal to power, and power is not equal to competence. But competence does allow you to have a certain amount of influence. And I think those things get they get put together. Anyway, I have to go do another podcast right now with Drinkling's Roastery Cafe. I'll see you guys later.